A German Shepherd blocks a moving train. The engineer hits the brakes, just in time. But when he steps out expecting a stray, he sees something that stops him cold. Military tags, battle scars, and eyes that refuse to back down. This dog isn't lost. He's trying to warn them. As the dog growls and barks toward the woods, a man in a sharp suit arrives, demanding the dog be removed. But the shepherd reacts. Only to him. Something's buried beneath those tracks, something dangerous. And what this dog knows is enough to shatter a man's world. What is this loyal dog protecting, and what truth made the engineer break down in tears? Your comments and presence here remind me why I tell these stories. If you still believe in the healing strength of love, truth, and quiet courage, then you're the reason this channel exists. John Calloway's hands moved across the control panel with practiced ease, his weathered fingers finding each switch and lever without needing to look. After 12 years on this same Montana freight route, every mile felt as familiar as the calluses on his palms. The gentle sway of the locomotive car had become as natural as breathing, and the steady clickety-clack of wheels on rails kept perfect time with his internal clock. He glanced at his watch, 6:15 in the morning, right on schedule. The early autumn sun was just beginning to peek over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. John allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. Being punctual wasn't just a job requirement for him. It was a point of pride. Safety check complete. Speed holding steady at 45 miles per hour. Visibility clear for 2 miles ahead, he muttered to himself, going through his mental checklist as he did every morning. The route ahead curved gently through dense pine forest, the tracks cutting a neat path through the wilderness. The radio crackled with routine updates from dispatch, and John responded with his usual brief, professional acknowledgments. Everything was proceeding exactly as it had thousands of times before, until it wasn't. His heart nearly stopped when he spotted something massive on the tracks ahead. Through the morning mist, a large shape came into focus. A dog, standing perfectly still in the middle of the rails. "No, no, no," John muttered, immediately hitting the horn with 3 long, urgent blasts. The sound echoed through the valley, but the dog didn't budge. John's training kicked in automatically as he initiated emergency braking procedures, his hands steady despite the surge of adrenaline. The massive freight train's wheels screamed against the rails, sending sparks flying as tons of metal fought against momentum. John's knuckles turned white on the controls as he watched the distance between the locomotive and the dog shrinking far too quickly. Finally, with a shuddering groan that seemed to rattle every bolt in the engine, the train ground to a halt. John's heart was pounding as he peered through the windshield. The dog was still there, barely 15 feet from the front of the locomotive. "Damn fool animal's going to get itself killed," John grumbled, grabbing his safety vest and flashlight. He'd had to stop for wildlife before, but usually they scattered long before it came to emergency braking. As he climbed down from the cab, John got his first clear look at the dog, and froze. This was no ordinary stray. The German Shepherd stood with military bearing, its amber eyes alert and intelligent. Battle scars marked its muscular frame, and around its neck gleamed a set of distinctive tags. "Easy there, big fellow," John called out softly, approaching with caution. The dog's posture wasn't aggressive, but there was an intensity about it that commanded respect. As he drew closer, he could read the tags. Ranger MWD, followed by a service number and unit designation. "Military working dog," John whispered, recognition dawning. He'd seen enough news stories about service dogs to know what those initials meant. This wasn't some lost pet. This was a trained military operative. Before John could process this revelation, Ranger's behavior shifted dramatically. The German Shepherd began barking frantically, turning to face the dense woods to their right. His barks weren't random or panicked. They had a purposeful quality that made the hair on the back of John's neck stand up. Ranger moved with deliberate precision, positioning himself between the train and a specific section of the forest. He would take a few steps toward John, bark insistently, then turn back to the woods, clearly trying to communicate something. The dog's tactical movements and alert posture spoke of extensive training. Each motion seemed calculated, each bark a deliberate signal. John had spent enough years working alone on the railroad to trust his instincts, and right now every one of them was telling him that this was no ordinary encounter. "What are you trying to tell me, boy?" John asked quietly, studying the section of forest that had captured Ranger's attention. The German Shepherd's ears perked up at his voice, and those intelligent amber eyes fixed on John with an almost human intensity. In that moment, John realized his perfectly scheduled day was about to take a very unexpected turn. John knelt slowly, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. "Come on, boy. We need to get you off these tracks." He patted his thigh invitingly, but Ranger remained fixed in place, alternating between urgent barks and intense stares at the wooded area. The crunch of tires on gravel cut through the morning air. A sleek black sedan pulled up alongside the tracks, and Railroad Supervisor Dale Brennan stepped out, his expensive suit looking out of place against the rural backdrop. His cold eyes took in the scene as he strode toward them. "Calloway, what's the holdup?" Brennan's voice carried the sharp edge of authority. "This line needs to be cleared immediately." The moment Brennan appeared, Ranger's demeanor changed dramatically. The German Shepherd's fur bristled, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. He positioned himself in a defensive stance, teeth bared specifically at Brennan. "It's a military working dog, sir," John explained, noting the stark contrast between Ranger's previous behavior and this sudden aggression. "He seems to be trying to alert us to something in those woods." Brennan's face tightened. "I don't care if it's the president's dog. Get that animal off my tracks now, or I'll call animal control to handle it." John watched as Ranger's growl intensified specifically when Brennan took a step closer. The dog's reaction seemed personal, almost knowing. Something about this didn't add up. "Give me a few minutes," John said, his voice steady. "I might be able to trace the owner through his tags." Brennan's jaw clenched, but he stepped back toward his car. 5 minutes, Calloway. Not 1 second more." Once Brennan was out of earshot, John examined Ranger's tags more closely. Beyond the military identification, he found a local veterinary clinic's number. He pulled out his phone and dialed. The clinic receptionist was helpful. "Oh, Ranger." "Yes, he belongs to the Chen family. Poor Tommy Chen was a real hero. Lost his life in Afghanistan 6 months ago. Such a tragedy. His sister Rebecca keeps the family farm just off Route 12. John thanked her and quickly found Rebecca Chen's contact information. As the phone rang, he noticed Brennan pacing by his car, checking his watch repeatedly. "Hello?" A young woman's voice answered, tinged with worry. "Ms. Chen? This is John Calloway from Montana Northern Railroad. I believe I've found your dog." "Ranger?" Relief flooded her voice. "He disappeared 3 days ago. I've been searching everywhere." "He's here on the tracks, about 5 miles east of Marshall Creek. He seems very agitated about something in the woods." There was a pause on the line. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice was lower, more urgent. "That's near our property line. 3 days ago I started getting calls. Men threatening me, demanding I sell the farm. They said things about Tommy." Her voice caught. "Things they couldn't have known unless—" John watched Brennan through the locomotive's window, remembering Ranger's immediate hostility toward him. "Miss Chen, could you come out here? Something's not right about this situation." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Rebecca said firmly. When she arrived, John immediately noticed her resemblance to the photograph he'd seen in a local news article about Tommy. The same determined eyes, the same set to her jaw. She wore her brother's dog tags around her neck, the metal catching the morning light. Ranger's reaction to Rebecca was immediate and emotional. The German Shepherd bounded to her, all his previous tension melting into joy as he pressed against her legs. She knelt, wrapping her arms around his thick neck. "The day Ranger disappeared," Rebecca explained quietly to John, wiping tears from her eyes. "A man called saying they knew the real reason Tommy died in Afghanistan. Said if I didn't sell the farm, particularly the memorial garden we made for Tommy, they'd make sure everyone knew the truth about him." Her fingers tightened in Ranger's fur. "But Tommy was a hero. He saved his entire unit. They're lying." John noticed Brennan watching them intently from his car, his phone pressed to his ear. Ranger followed his gaze and growled again, the sound carrying clearly across the tracks. "Has Ranger been acting this way toward anyone else?" John asked, gesturing toward Brennan. Rebecca shook her head. "Number and Ranger was extensively trained in Afghanistan. He doesn't react like this without cause." She stood straighter, Tommy's dog tags glinting at her throat. "Something's wrong here, Mr. Calloway, and I think Ranger knows exactly what it is." Rebecca hugged Ranger close, her fingers trembling slightly as she gathered her thoughts. The morning sun cast long shadows across the railroad tracks, and a cool Montana breeze rustled through the nearby trees. John noticed how she kept glancing nervously at Brennan's car, her hand unconsciously touching her brother's dog tags for comfort. "It started about 2 months ago," she said quietly, keeping her voice low enough that only John could hear. "At first it was just business cards in the mailbox from Brennan Development Company. Then came the letters offering to buy the property." She swallowed hard. "But I can't sell that land. Tommy's memorial garden is there. It's all I have left of him." John nodded encouragingly, noting how Ranger pressed closer to Rebecca's side when she mentioned the garden. The German shepherd's eyes remained fixed on Brennan's car, his posture alert and protective. "The offers kept getting higher," Rebecca continued, "but when I wouldn't budge, things changed." Her voice grew tight. "Someone started calling late at night. They knew things about Tommy's last mission in Afghanistan, details that weren't in any news report. They said—" She paused, struggling with the words. "They said they'd make sure everyone knew the real story about how Tommy died if I didn't sell." Ranger's head suddenly snapped toward Brennan as the supervisor stepped out of his car. The dog's growl was low and threatening, his body positioning itself between Rebecca and the approaching man. John watched this calculated movement with growing concern. This wasn't the behavior of a confused or frightened animal. Ranger was acting with clear purpose. "Ms. Chen," Brennan called out, his professional smile not reaching his eyes. "I wasn't aware this was your dog causing our delay. Perhaps we could discuss this situation, along with my company's latest offer for your property?" Rebecca stiffened. "There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Brennan. The land isn't for sale." John observed how Ranger's aggressive stance intensified with each step Brennan took towards them. The dog's military training was evident in his precise movements and focused attention. This wasn't random aggression. Ranger was responding to something specific about Brennan. "The calls got worse last week," Rebecca told John, keeping her eyes on Brennan. "They started describing the garden in detail, the exact flowers we planted, the bench where I sit to read Tommy's letters, even the small flags his unit sent me. They could only know those things if they'd been on our property." "And Ranger disappeared 3 days ago?" John asked, pieces starting to click into place. Rebecca nodded. "The night after the worst call yet. They said they had proof that Tommy—" Her voice caught. "That Tommy had betrayed his unit. It's a lie. My brother saved those men. He died making sure they all got out safely." John watched as Ranger's attention kept shifting between Brennan and the wooded area beside the tracks. The dog's behavior was methodical, almost tactical, as if he was guarding against a specific threat he'd identified. "The garden means everything to me," Rebecca said, wiping away a tear. "Tommy loved that spot. Before he deployed the last time, we spent a whole weekend planning it together. He said he wanted a peaceful place to come home to." She took a shaky breath. "Now it's where I feel closest to him." Brennan's voice cut through their conversation. "Time's up, Calloway." That train needs to move now. But John was focused on Ranger's reaction. The German Shepherd's training was evident in every movement, the way he tracked Brennan, how he maintained his protective position, the calculated nature of his responses. This wasn't just an animal blocking the tracks. This was a highly trained military dog acting with purpose. "These threats," John said carefully, "they started after you refused Brennan's company's offers?" "Yes," Rebecca confirmed. "And they know things they shouldn't about Tommy, things that were classified. Every time I say no, they reveal more details about his last mission." Her hands clenched into fists. "They're trying to threaten his memory to force me to sell." Ranger suddenly barked sharply, his attention laser-focused on Brennan, who had taken another step closer. The dog's reaction was precise and controlled, a warning from a trained professional rather than an emotional response. John looked between Ranger's defensive stance, Rebecca's worried face, and Brennan's cold expression. The connection was becoming clear. Ranger wasn't just randomly choosing this spot to make his stand. The highly trained military dog was responding to something more sinister, something that tied together Rebecca's threatening calls, Tommy's classified mission, and Brennan's aggressive pursuit of the Memorial Garden land. John couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening here. While Rebecca comforted Ranger, he pulled out his phone and opened the railroad's scheduling app. Years of following safety protocols had taught him to trust his instincts when things didn't add up. "Give me a minute," he told Rebecca, scrolling through months of incident reports. A pattern started emerging that made his stomach turn. In the past year alone, there had been 6 accidents along this stretch of track, all of them involving properties that were later sold to Brennan Development Company. He clicked on each report, reading the details more carefully now. Emergency track maintenance in Miller's Creek led to the Miller family dairy farm being sold 3 months ago. A hazardous materials spill near Peterson's ranch resulted in a quick sale to Brennan's company. Each incident followed the same pattern: a railroad emergency, environmental concerns, and then a swift property acquisition at rock-bottom prices. John glanced up at Brennan, who was pacing near his car while barking orders into his phone. The supervisor's expensive suit and polished shoes seemed out of place against the rural Montana backdrop. Something about the man's impatience to move the train struck John as more than just professional concern. "Rebecca," John said quietly, "has Brennan mentioned anything about environmental assessments or contamination risks to your property?" She nodded, her eyes widening. "Last week, he said the railroad might need to do some emergency track work that could affect our groundwater. He offered to buy the land before any potential issues arose." She paused, realization dawning on her face. "You don't think—" "I think Ranger's trying to tell us something specific." John watched the German Shepherd's behavior more closely now. The dog wasn't just blocking the tracks. He was moving back and forth along a particular section, his nose working the air in a practiced pattern. John remembered his safety training about explosive detection dogs. Their behavior was distinctive: methodical sweeps, focused attention, and clear alerts when they found something. Ranger was displaying all these signs. "Those threatening calls about Tommy's mission," John said carefully. "They knew classified details, the kind of information that someone with military connections might have access to." Rebecca's hand went to her brother's dog tags. "But why would Brennan have that kind of information?" John pulled up another screen on his phone, this time accessing public records. Because before he was a railroad supervisor, Dale Brennan worked as a military contractor. He showed Rebecca the article. His company supplied equipment for operations in Afghanistan, including Tommy's last mission. Ranger barked sharply, drawing their attention back to the tracks. The dog was indicating a specific spot with the focused intensity that only came from years of military training. "He's not just blocking the train," John said, his voice tight with concern. "He's alerting to something on the tracks, something he's been trained to detect." Rebecca gasped. "Tommy said Ranger was one of the best explosive detection dogs in their unit." The pieces clicked into place. John looked at the section of track Ranger was guarding. It ran right alongside Rebecca's property, where the memorial garden sat. A derailment here, especially one involving hazardous materials, would make the land uninhabitable. "Brennan's not just pressuring people to sell," John said grimly. "He's manufacturing accidents to force them out, and he's using his position with the railroad to cover it up." He thought about the previous incidents, how each accident had been perfectly placed to affect specific properties, how the environmental damage always seemed to make selling to Brennan the only option. And now, with Rebecca's land. The threatening calls, the classified information about Tommy, it was all pressure to make you sell before he had to use this option. John gestured to where Ranger stood guard. When you wouldn't give in, he planted something on the tracks, something that would create an accident big enough to force you out. Rebecca's face paled. And Ranger knew. That's why he ran away from the farm 3 days ago. He must have detected what Brennan was planning. John watched the German Shepherd's alert posture, noting how the dog kept his body between them and the suspected location of the explosives. Even now, months after Tommy's death, Ranger was still protecting his handler's family. "We need to call the police," John said, reaching for his phone. "And the military police, too. If Brennan has access to classified information about Tommy's mission, this goes deeper than just land grabs." Ranger's continuous alerting left no doubt. There were explosives on the track, planted by someone who knew exactly how to create an accident that would destroy Rebecca's property and Tommy's memorial garden. The dog's military training and loyalty had uncovered a scheme that went far beyond simple real estate fraud. John's hands trembled as he scrolled through the documents on his phone. What had started as a simple pattern of suspicious accidents had led him down a darker path. Using his railroad employee credentials, he had accessed archived incident reports that painted a disturbing picture of Dale Brennan's activities. "Look at this," he said to Rebecca, showing her a news article from 2 years ago. Thomas McPherson, a rancher from the next county over. He refused to sell his land to Brennan Development Company after a mysterious chemical spill from a passing train. 3 weeks later, they found him at the bottom of a ravine in his truck. Rebecca leaned closer, her face pale in the afternoon light. "They ruled it an accident." "According to the official report." John pulled up another document. But McPherson had just filed a complaint with the Railroad Commission about suspicious activity on his property. The complaint disappeared from the system a day after his death. Ranger whined softly, still maintaining his protective stance near the tracks. The German Shepherd's military training seemed to make him more alert to the growing tension in the air. John continued digging through records on his phone, each new discovery making his heart sink further. There's more. In the past 3 years, Brennan's company has acquired 15 properties along this rail line. Every single one followed the same pattern. A railroad incident, environmental concerns, then a quick sale at a fraction of the market value. "But surely someone must have noticed." Rebecca clutched her brother's dog tags tightly. "They did." John's voice was grim as he showed her another article. A local environmental inspector named Sarah Martinez started asking questions 6 months ago about the pattern of chemical spills. She was suddenly transferred to Alaska, and all her pending investigations were closed. John pulled out his personal notebook and started documenting everything he'd found. Names, dates, property records, evidence of a criminal network that stretched across 3 counties. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became that Brennan's influence extended far beyond just the railroad. "I need to call the state police," John said, reaching for his phone. But before he could dial, Rebecca grabbed his arm. "Wait," she whispered urgently. "Look who just pulled up." A sheriff's department cruiser had parked next to Brennan's luxury car. Deputy Mark Wilson stepped out, and John watched as he and Brennan exchanged familiar nods. The 2 men spoke in low voices, with Brennan gesturing toward the train and then pointing at John and Rebecca. "They're working together," Rebecca said softly. "Last month, when I tried to file a complaint about the threatening calls, Deputy Wilson took the report. Nothing ever came of it." John's mind raced as he realized how deep this went. The railroad, local law enforcement, even connections to military contractors. Brennan had built a network of corruption that made him virtually untouchable at the local level. As if sensing their realization, Brennan broke away from the deputy and strode toward them. His expensive shoes crunched on the gravel, and Ranger's growl grew deeper. "John," Brennan called out, his voice carrying false warmth. "Can we speak privately for a moment?" John glanced at Rebecca, then stepped forward. They moved a short distance away, just out of earshot of the others. "You've been doing some interesting research this afternoon," Brennan said quietly, his smile never reaching his cold eyes. "Accessing company records, looking into old incidents. That's not really part of your job description, is it?" John felt his mouth go dry. "How did you—" "I know everything that happens on my railroad," Brennan cut him off smoothly. "Just like I know about your pension, coming due in 3 years. 25 years of service, that's quite an achievement. It would be a shame to lose all that over a misunderstanding." The threat was clear. John stood his ground, though his heart was pounding. "Is that what happened to Thomas McPherson? A misunderstanding?" Brennan's smile vanished. "Accidents happen, John, especially to people who don't understand their place in the natural order of things." He gestured toward Rebecca. "That girl's brother didn't understand either. Kept asking questions about missing equipment, irregular supply shipments. Some questions are better left unasked." John felt a chill run through him as the implications of Brennan's words sank in. Tommy Chen's death in Afghanistan might not have been the combat casualty everyone believed. "You have a choice to make," Brennan continued. "Walk away now, finish your route, and enjoy your retirement in 3 years. Or keep digging, and well—" He shrugged. "The railroad can be a dangerous place. Equipment malfunctions, signal failures, all sorts of unfortunate accidents can happen to even the most experienced engineers." With that, Brennan turned and walked back to his car, leaving John standing there with the weight of the threat pressing down on him. When John returned to Rebecca, his face must have shown his concern. "What did he say?" she asked. "He knows we're investigating," John replied quietly. "And he just made it very clear that if we continue, neither of us will be safe." He looked at Ranger, still guarding the tracks where the explosives lay hidden. "We're dealing with something much bigger than land fraud. Your brother may have uncovered part of it in Afghanistan, and it got him killed." Rebecca's face hardened with determination. "Then we need help beyond the local authorities." John nodded, his mind already working on their next move. The local police were compromised, but there had to be someone they could trust, someone beyond Brennan's reach. John's hands trembled as he stared at the photographs spread across his kitchen table. Each image told a story of Brennan's corruption: foreclosed properties, mysteriously damaged farms, and one particularly haunting picture of a demolished homestead. The morning sun cast long shadows across the evidence he'd gathered, making the scene feel even more ominous. His doorbell rang, making him jump. Through the peephole, he saw Rebecca Chen standing on his porch, her face pale with worry. Ranger stood alertly at her side, his ears perked forward. "You need to see this," Rebecca said as soon as John opened the door. She thrust a crumpled paper toward him, a notice of immediate eviction. "They're saying there are structural concerns with my property. They didn't even do an inspection." John's jaw tightened as he read the document. "This is fake. The letterhead's wrong. I've seen enough railroad paperwork to know." "That's not all." Rebecca's voice cracked. "Someone broke into my house last night. If Ranger hadn't been there—" She reached down to scratch behind the German shepherd's ears. The dog remained focused, scanning their surroundings with military precision. Before John could respond, his phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number showed a photo of him talking to Rebecca outside the train station yesterday. The message below read, "Last warning. Walk away or lose everything." "They're watching us," John said quietly, showing Rebecca the phone. "Brennan's getting desperate." Rebecca's eyes suddenly lit up with recognition. Wait, this reminds me of something Tommy told me before he deployed. She pulled out her brother's dog tags, which she always wore around her neck. Tommy wasn't just worried about serving overseas. He said something felt wrong here at home. He was looking into local property deals that didn't add up. John leaned forward. What kind of deals? Farms being bought up cheap after accidents. Business owners selling suddenly after health code violations appeared out of nowhere. Tommy said it was too organized to be coincidence. Rebecca's voice grew stronger. He was gathering proof, keeping records. The night before he shipped out, he told me he'd hidden everything somewhere safe. Ranger's ears suddenly pricked up. The dog moved to the window, his posture rigid and alert. Through the glass, they spotted a black SUV crawling past the house for the second time in 5 minutes. "Down!" John whispered sharply, pulling Rebecca away from the window. Ranger stayed low but maintained his watch, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "We need to find Tommy's records," John said once the SUV passed. "But first, you're not going back to that house alone. Pack what you need. You'll stay with my sister in the next county." Rebecca started to protest, but John cut her off. "I've seen what Brennan does to people who stand in his way. That dead landowner I told you about? The police ruled it an accident, but I found proof it wasn't." A sharp bark from Ranger interrupted them. The dog had moved to the back door, his body language showing clear signs of alert training. John carefully approached the window and spotted movement in his backyard. 2 men in dark clothes trying to stay hidden behind his garden shed. "Back door's covered," John whispered. "They're trying to box us in." Rebecca's eyes widened, but her voice remained steady. "What do we do?" John quickly gathered the evidence into his briefcase. "Your brother trained Ranger for tactical situations, right?" Rebecca nodded. "Tommy said he was the best detection and protection dog in their unit." "Then we follow his lead." John grabbed his car keys. "Ranger knows what he's doing. He's been one step ahead of Brennan this whole time, from finding those explosives on the track to protecting your house." As if understanding, Ranger moved to the side door, the only exit not visible from the street or backyard. The dog's behavior was focused and deliberate, exactly what John would expect from a highly trained military working dog. "Tommy was investigating Brennan," Rebecca said, as they quietly made their way to the side door. What if that's the real reason he was deployed so suddenly? What if Brennan pulled strings to get him sent away? The possibility hung heavy in the air as they slipped out of the house, following Ranger's silent guidance through the neighbor's yard. Behind them, they heard the sound of breaking glass. Brennan's men had moved in, only to find an empty house. "We need to find those records," John said as they reached his backup vehicle, an old truck parked 2 blocks away. "They're the key to everything. Tommy knew it back then, and now Ranger's helping us finish what he started." The old truck rumbled down the Forest Service road, kicking up dust in the early afternoon sun. John gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white as he checked the rearview mirror for the 10th time in as many minutes. In the passenger seat, Rebecca clutched Tommy's dog tags while Ranger sat alertly in the back, his ears forward and nose working constantly. "There's an old ranger station about 3 miles ahead," John said, his voice tight. "We can regroup there and—" The sharp crack of gunfire cut through the air. The truck's side mirror exploded into fragments. "Get down!" John shouted, swerving as more shots rang out. Through the rearview mirror, he spotted 2 black SUVs gaining on them, one with a man leaning out the passenger window holding a rifle. Ranger's military training kicked in instantly. The German Shepherd's posture changed, becoming rigid and focused. He barked twice, sharp, commanding sounds that Rebecca immediately recognized from Tommy's training sessions. "He's warning us!" Rebecca ducked lower as another shot pinged off the truck's frame. Tommy taught him different barks for different threats. The forest road curved sharply ahead. John took the turn hard, the truck's tires spraying gravel. The pursuing vehicles were closer now, and through the dust cloud, He could make out Dale Brennan's face in the lead SUV, his usually composed features twisted with rage. "They're trying to force us off the road," John said through gritted teeth. The truck shuddered as one of the SUVs clipped their rear bumper. Ranger suddenly lunged forward, pushing his head between the front seats and barking urgently toward the right side of the road. Without questioning the dog's instinct, John yanked the wheel hard right, taking them down a narrow logging trail just as another burst of gunfire tore through where they had been. The truck bounced violently on the rough track, but the tighter space forced their pursuers to slow down. Ranger maintained his tactical position, ears swiveling to track sounds and nose testing the air constantly. "There!" Rebecca pointed to a small clearing ahead. "Tommy used to bring Ranger here for training exercises. There's a network of old mining tunnels." The truck's engine suddenly sputtered and died. A lucky shot must have hit something vital. They rolled to a stop in the clearing, the sound of pursuing vehicles growing louder. "Run!" John grabbed his briefcase full of evidence, and they bolted from the truck. Ranger took point position, leading them toward a heavily wooded area with the precision of a military patrol. Behind them, car doors slammed and voices shouted. Brennan's voice rose above the others. "Find them! And bring me that damn dog's head!" They crashed through the underbrush, following Ranger's lead. The dog moved with purpose, choosing paths that provided cover while remaining firm enough for quick movement. Years of military training were evident in every calculated decision. "Stop right there!" The command came from their left. One of Brennan's men had circled around, his gun trained on Rebecca. Before the man could fire, Ranger launched into action. The German Shepherd moved like a tan and black missile, years of combat training evident in his precise attack. He struck the gunman's weapon arm first, the impact sending the gun flying. The man went down hard under 90 pounds of highly trained military dog. John grabbed the fallen weapon while Rebecca quickly collected scattered ammunition. They could hear Brennan coordinating his men through radio chatter, trying to surround them. "He's going for the detonator," Rebecca said, recognizing the sound of Brennan barking orders about backup plans. "He'll try to trigger those explosives, make it look like we died in an accident." Ranger's head snapped up, and he gave 3 sharp barks, the same signal he'd used on the tracks. The dog had known about the explosives all along, had been trying to warn them from the start. "But you already took care of that, didn't you, boy?" John said, sudden understanding dawning. "That's why you were digging at the tracks. You didn't just find the explosives, you disabled them." The dog's tail wagged once in confirmation before he tensed again, sensing approaching threats. They heard Brennan's frustrated roar in the distance. "The charges aren't responding." "That mutt must have damaged the wiring. Find them before they reach the highway." Ranger suddenly pressed against Rebecca's legs, urging her toward a thick stand of pines. Hidden behind the trees was the entrance to one of the old mining tunnels, its mouth barely visible behind years of growth. "In here," Rebecca whispered. "Tommy showed me these tunnels. They run for miles under the mountain." They ducked inside just as Brennan's men converged on the clearing. Ranger took rear guard, his body alert for any pursuit. The tunnel was dark but surprisingly dry, its walls reinforced with old timber. "Stop!" Brennan's voice echoed from the tunnel entrance. He stood silhouetted against the daylight, a pistol in one hand, and what looked like a remote detonator in the other. 2 armed men flanked him. "You've cost me everything. My reputation, my contracts, my whole operation." Ranger moved forward, positioning himself between Brennan and his charges. The dog's growl reverberated through the tunnel, a sound straight from the battlefields of Afghanistan. "That's far enough," John said firmly, raising the captured rifle. "We have enough evidence to expose everything. Your land grabs, your corruption, the murder you covered up." "Evidence?" Brennan laughed, but there was an edge of desperation in his voice. "Against my word? The word of a decorated business leader against a train engineer and some dead soldier's sister?" Rebecca stepped forward, Tommy's dog tags gleaming in the dim light. "My brother knew what you were doing. He left proof. That's why you had him deployed, isn't it? Called in favors to get him sent into danger? Brennan's face twisted. He raised his gun, but Ranger was already moving. The dog launched himself at Brennan with military precision, targeting the arm holding the detonator first. The device went flying, smashing against the tunnel wall as Ranger's momentum carried both him and Brennan to the ground. Brennan's men raised their weapons, but John was faster. The captured rifle cracked twice, and both men dropped their guns, clutching wounded hands. "Rebecca! The detonator!" John called out, keeping his weapon trained on the wounded men. She grabbed the damaged device, holding it up to the light from the tunnel entrance. It's useless now. Ranger made sure of that when he dug up the charges. Ranger maintained his hold on Brennan, who had stopped struggling. The dog's training was evident in how he pinned the man without causing serious injury, the same skills he'd used countless times with enemy combatants overseas. "Tommy would be proud of you, Ranger," Rebecca said softly, watching her brother's loyal partner complete one final mission. "You finished what he started." The truck's engine roared as John navigated the treacherous mountain roads, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Rebecca kept checking behind them while Ranger stood alert, his military-trained senses scanning for threats through the broken back window. "They're splitting up," Rebecca warned, spotting headlights branching off onto parallel forest roads. "They're trying to cut us off." John nodded grimly. "Brennan knows these access roads from his development surveys. We need to get somewhere they can't predict." Ranger suddenly barked and pawed at Rebecca's shoulder, his amber eyes fixed on a barely visible trail to their right. Rebecca's face lit up with recognition. "John, take that turn. Tommy and Ranger used to train up here. There's an old fire watch station that overlooks the whole valley." Without hesitation, John swung the truck onto the overgrown path. Branches scraped against the metal as they climbed higher into the mountains. The trail was rough, but John's years of handling heavy machinery helped him keep the truck steady. "We need to document everything," John said, pulling a small digital camera from his jacket. "I've been gathering evidence against Brennan for days, but we need proof of tonight's attack." Rebecca took the camera, her hands shaking slightly as she photographed the bullet holes in their vehicle. "The federal investigators you contacted, how long until they get here?" "I sent everything I had about Brennan's previous land grabs to the FBI field office in Helena yesterday. They said they were already building a case." John checked his watch. "But we have to survive until morning." Ranger's posture suddenly stiffened, and he let out a low growl. Seconds later, gunshots echoed through the trees. John swerved as bullets pinged off the truck's frame. Through the trees, they caught glimpses of Brennan's men on ATVs, more maneuverable than the SUVs on the narrow mountain trails. "The fire tower's just ahead," Rebecca pointed. "It has good sight lines and only one way up." They barely made it to the clearing before their truck's engine sputtered and died, hit by the gunfire. John and Rebecca scrambled out, Ranger leading them toward the old wooden tower that rose like a skeleton against the starlit sky. "Up! Go!" John urged, pushing Rebecca toward the stairs while he grabbed his backpack of evidence. Ranger bounded up beside them, taking a defensive position on the landing as they climbed. The tower's cabin was small, but offered a clear view of the surrounding forest. John immediately barricaded the trapdoor while Rebecca found the tower's old emergency radio equipment. "It's dead," she said, frustrated. "They must have cut the power years ago." "Use this," John handed her his cell phone. "I sent a text to my FBI contact with our location before we lost signal. Keep trying to get through." Ranger paced the cabin's perimeter, his military training evident in how he checked each approach angle. His ears suddenly perked up, and he let out a warning bark moments before voices carried up from below. "We know you're up there, Calloway," Brennan's voice boomed through the darkness. "You're only making it worse for yourselves." John and Rebecca stayed low, watching as flashlight beams swept the tower's base. They counted at least 6 men down there, with Brennan directing them to surround the structure. "Your brother taught Ranger well," John whispered to Rebecca, watching the dog maintain his alert stance. "He's been 3 steps ahead of Brennan this whole time." Rebecca nodded. tears in her eyes. Tommy always said Ranger was special. That's why they were chosen for the most dangerous detection missions in Afghanistan. She clutched her brother's dog tags that hung around her neck. Now he's still protecting people, just like Tommy would have wanted. The first attack came from the south side, with 2 of Brennan's men trying to climb the external stairs. Ranger's warning gave them time to brace the door with the old fire tower furniture. The whole structure shook as the men slammed against it, but the barricade held. "You can't hide up there forever," Brennan shouted. "The longer this takes, the worse it gets for you." John was checking his evidence files when his phone in Rebecca's hand suddenly lit up. "Signal!" she gasped. "1 bar!" They hunched over the phone together as Rebecca typed frantically, sending their location and situation to John's FBI contact. The reply came almost immediately. "Hold position. Help 20 minutes out." Their relief was short-lived as a new sound cut through the night, the crack of wood splintering. Brennan's men had found axes in their vehicles and were attacking the tower's support beams. "They're going to bring down the whole tower!" Rebecca cried. John looked at Ranger, seeing the same tactical intelligence in the dog's eyes that had saved them before. "Rebecca, do you trust him?" She nodded without hesitation. "Then let him lead. He knows these mountains and he's trained for night operations." They quickly gathered the evidence files and prepared themselves. When the tower gave its first dangerous sway, John kicked open the trapdoor on the opposite side, from where most of Brennan's men were concentrated. Ranger took point, leading them down the maintenance ladder on the tower's blind side. His military training showed in how he chose the darkest shadows, guiding them silently through the trees, while shouts and confusion erupted behind them as Brennan's men realized they'd slipped away. The German shepherd led them along game trails too narrow for vehicles, his knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable as they heard ATVs roaring in the distance. But Brennan wasn't giving up. Flashlight beams swept through the trees as his men spread out to search the forest. "There!" A shout went up as one of the beams caught their movement. Ranger immediately changed direction, leading them down a steep ravine. The sounds of pursuit grew closer as they scrambled through the underbrush. Rebecca stumbled, but John caught her arm, pulling her forward as bullets whizzed past them. They burst into a small clearing just as the first hints of dawn began lightening the eastern sky. But Brennan had anticipated their direction. He stood at the clearing's edge, pistol raised, his face twisted with desperate fury. "It's over," he snarled. "You've cost me everything, and now—" His words cut off as Ranger launched forward with a ferocious growl, his military attack training unleashed. At the same instant, the clearing erupted with blinding light from above. The thundering chop of helicopter rotors drowned out all other sounds as spotlights swept the area. "FBI, drop your weapons!" The command boomed from multiple directions as federal agents emerged from the tree line, weapons drawn. Brennan's men, scattered through the forest, began surrendering one by one. Ranger held Brennan pinned until federal agents secured him, the German shepherd's protective instincts keeping him focused until he was certain the threat was neutralized. Only then did he return to Rebecca's side, pressing against her leg as she sank to her knees, overcome with relief. John watched as FBI agents began collecting their evidence and rounding up Brennan's associates. The morning sun was cresting the mountains, bringing light to the darkness that had hidden so much corruption. The morning stillness shattered as the distinct whop 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 of helicopter blades cut through the dawn air. John, Rebecca, and Ranger watched from their position as a sleek black helicopter descended into a hidden clearing half a mile away. "That has to be Brennan's escape plan," John said, his voice barely audible over the rotors. He grabbed his radio, alerting the FBI teams converging on their location. "Suspect attempting aerial evacuation. Coordinates incoming." Rebecca clutched Tommy's dog tags. "He's not getting away, not after what he did to Tommy." Ranger's ears perked up at his former handler's name. The German shepherd's tactical training kicked in as he assessed the situation, his amber eyes tracking the helicopter's movement. FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez quickly organized her teams. "We need to move fast, but carefully. That clearing's too hot for a direct approach." But Ranger was already moving, his military instincts guiding him through the underbrush. John and Rebecca followed, trusting the dog's judgment as he led them along a ridge overlooking the makeshift landing zone. Below, they could see Brennan rushing toward the helicopter, carrying a briefcase stuffed with documents. 2 armed guards provided cover while the pilot ran through pre-flight checks. "He's going to take off before our ground teams can get into position," Agent Martinez whispered urgently. Ranger didn't wait for human deliberation. The German Shepherd bolted down the ridge, using the same tactical approach he'd perfected in Afghanistan. His dark fur blended with the shadows as he circled behind the helicopter. "Look at his movement pattern," Rebecca breathed. "That's exactly how Tommy described their compound infiltrations overseas." Brennan was just reaching for the helicopter's door when Ranger struck. The dog's powerful jaws clamped down on the fuel line, running to the external tank, ripping it free. Aviation fuel spilled across the ground as warning alerts blared in the cockpit. The pilot's voice carried over the chaos. "We've lost fuel pressure. We can't take off." Brennan's face contorted with rage as he raised his pistol toward Ranger. But before he could fire, FBI teams burst from the tree line, weapons drawn. "Federal agents, on the ground now!" In the confusion, Ranger circled back to disable one of the armed guards while federal agents swarmed the clearing. Brennan and his accomplices were quickly subdued and handcuffed. Agent Martinez approached John and Rebecca as her team secured the scene. "We found Tommy Chen's final mission reports in Brennan's files. He had discovered evidence of the railroad corruption scheme while home on leave. Brennan arranged for false intelligence to be fed to Tommy's unit in Afghanistan, leading them into an ambush." Rebecca's hands flew to her mouth. Tommy was murdered because he found out the truth. "Your brother was a hero twice over," Martinez confirmed. "He died trying to protect his community from corruption, just like he protected his country overseas. We've already uncovered evidence linking Brennan to illegal land seizures in 3 states, plus multiple murders disguised as accidents." Ranger pressed against Rebecca's leg as she absorbed the news about her brother. The German Shepherd's mission, carrying on Tommy's work and protecting his family, was finally complete. John watched as FBI evidence teams carried out boxes of documents from the helicopter. "Tommy started this fight," he said quietly, "and his partner here made sure we finished it." In the weeks following Brennan's arrest, the quiet Montana landscape began its healing, much like the people who had fought to protect it. John Calloway found himself spending more and more time at the Chen family farm, helping Rebecca sort through Tommy's belongings and plan for the future. One evening, as the sun painted the memorial garden in warm golden hues, John watched Ranger demonstrating remarkable patience with a visiting veteran's service dog. The German Shepherd's natural teaching ability sparked an idea in Rebecca's mind. "Tommy always said Ranger was the best trainer in their unit," she said, her fingers absently touching her brother's dog tags. "Maybe this is how we honor both of them." The idea took root quickly. Rebecca's proposal to transform the property into a training facility for military working dogs received overwhelming support from veteran organizations. The same land Brennan had tried to steal would now serve as a living memorial to Tommy's sacrifice. "We'll call it the Chen Ranger Training Center," John suggested, watching the German Shepherd guide a younger dog through basic commands. "Tommy's legacy living on through every dog and handler that trains here." Rebecca's eyes welled with tears. "It's perfect, but Ranger needs a home too. Someone who understands him." John felt Ranger's amber eyes fixed on him. The dog had been staying with him temporarily after the investigation, but they both knew it had become more than temporary. Their morning routine had evolved naturally, Ranger accompanying John on his rail routes, alert and watchful, just as he had been with Tommy. "I think we already found each other," John said quietly. "Haven't we, boy?" Ranger pressed his head against John's hand in response. The bond between them, forged in crisis and strengthened through shared purpose, felt right. John, who had once preferred the solitude of his locomotive, now found himself surrounded by a new family of sorts. The adoption papers were simple, but their meaning ran deep. John had not just gained a companion. He had inherited a sacred trust. Ranger wasn't just a pet. He was a connection to Tommy's memory, a guardian with a continuing mission. 3 months later, John stood at the controls of his freight train, Ranger sitting alertly beside him. The Chen Ranger Training Center was visible from the tracks, its training yards full of activity. Rebecca had found her calling, working with veteran handlers and their dogs, sharing Tommy's story and ensuring his sacrifice created ripples of positive change. "Ready for another run, partner?" John asked, reaching down to scratch behind Ranger's ears. The dog's posture remained professional, but his tail wagged slightly at the familiar touch. Together they watched over the rails that had once nearly been an instrument of destruction, now a daily reminder of how courage and loyalty could transform lives. Through their shared journey, both man and dog had found something they didn't know they were missing, a purpose bigger than themselves, and a family bound not by blood, but by choice and shared devotion to a hero's memory. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.